Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Writers Roundtable. I'm joined today by James Coan, Ruth Ashkenazi, and Michael Harrington, all talented writers for the Braver Angels media page. I'm Greg Steinbrecher, and today we are talking about Fight Right, which is what the main messaging thrust is that Braver Angels is coordinating in the months leading up to the election, and the messaging changes. What is, I think, Build a House United in between the election inauguration, and then from there the messaging changes again. I'm flipping that, James. James, jump in. Tell us what it is.
Yes. So yeah, the Build a House United is the last one. With Malice Toward None is in between Election Day and Inauguration Day.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Because after Election Day, the hope would be to bring Americans together with no malice, which right now seems like a tall order. And I think the fight right messaging is appropriate because a lot of fighting wrong is happening right now. And I've been thinking about that a little bit because early on in Donald Trump's presidency, we had Charlottesville, which, as opposed to being the nadir of the tone of this country, seems to be more of a harbinger of things to come. In the last few months, we've obviously seen a lot of protests, which has a long and proud tradition in this country, but also riots and violence. If you pay attention to some corners of Twitter, people are very eager to share video of black-clad, masked, younger agitators getting into people's faces, throwing bottles filled with concrete. Just this last week in DC, you had them shouting in people's faces who were dining outside. You had them harassing attendees at the Republican National Convention as they were leaving. And then most tragically of all, you had what's happening in Wisconsin. What's the name of the city? Kenosha?
Kenosha.
Is that right? Kenosha, where there were riots after another police shooting that some details are still coming out about, which led to another shooting, which is more or less a Rorschach test. People on the right seeing it as a matter of property protection and self-defense, and those on the left seeing it as murder. I've seen some people call it an act of terror. So tensions are high, lots of fighting going on. And so the question before us is, because we like to think critically about what Braver Angels is doing, because if not us, who? We're thinking about whether fight right is the right message at the right time. And I know people have people who disagree about whether it's suitable and whether that's what we want to project. So, Michael, with all of that as a prologue, why don't you tell us what you think?
Well, we've discussed this a little bit before, so I hope I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I guess we
just to jump in real quick, you're not repeating yourself. That recording is lost forever.
I just meant for you four.
It only exists on the dark web. So you can repeat yourself ad nauseum, and no one's heard it except us that one time. That doesn't exist anymore.
My fear is that that the tenor of this conflict has become so heightened that just using the word fight incites a certain kind of trigger in people's minds, whether it's on one side or the other. And I think that since we last talked about this, it's even gotten a bit worse, because now you have people coming out and say, okay, well, you're going to riot for this cause, we're going to come in and oppose you. And so now you're sort of losing the society sense of order that, no, I thought the police and all this handled this kind of matter. Now it's average citizens saying, no, we're going to band together, and whether you want to call it, community protection or vigilantism or peaceful protesting or righteous, looting, I don't know, you call it all these things that the media calls it all these things, but what it comes down to is people not talking, people fighting. And it's people with a sense that we either win or lose to the death. And I think the problem for us in Braver Angels is that I feel like, jumping into the middle of this fray with the wrong message sort of puts us like, that scene in Braveheart where the two armies are ready to just come down on each other and beat the hell out of each other. And you're standing in the middle going, hey, why don't we just sit down and talk about this? And it's just kind of like, I feel like our message is going to get overrun. And if we aren't able to somehow pierce through that idea that this is a fight. It's not a fight, it's an election. I don't know if that, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of my view of this. And I fear that, well, reading some of this stuff in the media now, it's like, no, people have a sense that, no, this is, especially after the conventions, this is win or lose. This is not compromise. And I feel like, after just November 3rd, it's just going to get that much worse. And you might have to have another theme in there with like lawyers in love or something, because I have a feeling that there's two armies of lawyers ready. They've both got like 400 lawyers on either side ready to go at it over the election results. And it's just like, oh my God, may not be resolved until the new year, and it's just a little bit like, I don't know how you turn the tide on this, but I would like to be optimistic.
Yeah, I've been threatening to write an article for a while now that I only have the title of, which is Please God, Just Accept the Results of the Election. Because I am so worried that either side, no matter the result, is not going to, and that it'll go beyond #NotMyPresident, which was ineffectual as all hashtags are, to actually being some kind of movement or revolt on either side. I had a quick question, because there's a lot, what another fight seems to be the nomenclature about all of this, whether you call people protesters or rioters or all right. For people where this is about to be a weird edit, I got logged out of Zoom and now we're just plowing ahead here. I do worry that people aren't going to accept the results of the election. And what I was saying is that there are a lot of fights about the nomenclature, whether the protesters, rioters, whether saying Black Lives Matter is a universal affirmation of the dignity of the individual, or if you're saying the all capital letters at the front of each word version of it, which supports a political movement with a certain agenda and policy ideas. How much does that matter? I mean, if we all agreed on what every term meant, would that bring us any closer together, or do you think that's just another way for people to exercise power or to intimidate or to harangue? Do you have a sense of how important the words we use actually are? Michael?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it doesn't bring you to agreement to agree on the terms of the debate, but at least it keeps you from talking past each other all day long. And I think that's the problem, is you have, if you want to take the media as an example, it's the left and the right media just talk past each other. They don't ever converge on, okay, let's see, this is exactly the issue we want to deal with. Let's deal with it. We're using the same language, and let's find out exactly where our differences are. if our differences are just in terms of what words we use, it's kind of meaningless, right? And you know, I think that you do have to somehow decide how you're going to operationalize meaning through language. Otherwise, it's just, I don't know, then it's just Derrida forever or something. I don't know.
James, I've seen you nodding along to some of this. What do you make of what's been discussed so far?
Oh, I like what Michael said. I'll approach this fight-right conversation a little bit differently. Well, like Michael, I'm skeptical, but it's the primary reasons that I'm skeptical are somewhat different. I mean, first of all, I do want to say some positives about it. I think it's more connected to human nature and to emotions than a statement like civility or civil discourse, which is very highbrow and kind of static, and it doesn't seem realistic at this time, and I don't think at any time, and it doesn't seem to relate to how humans actually function. You know, it can be a good ideal, but that would be it. So I think it's good to have some emotion. But then there are some problems. So one problem is, who is it useful for? For Democrats, I think when they hear fight right, some of them will get into arguing lots of facts, and then they just sound condescending and sort of annoying. And I think some Reds will see it as an implicit dig on President Trump, because in terms of fighting right from the standpoint of, we have a new speaker. Yeah, so from the standpoint of Reds, President Trump doesn't always fight in perfectly argued ways. I guess another issue which we had talked about before was that there's emotions that seem to underlie a lot of the violence that we're seeing, feelings of fear and threat. And fight right is a behavioral message. This is what you should do. But it doesn't get very closely to how people should feel about one another or how they can feel better about one another. So I like messages that can potentially put the other side in a better light. This often involves strategies like showing what we actually have in common. To that language point, at least we, as people who are trying to depolarize, can try to choose relatively neutral language, but that doesn't actually bring people together. That just prevents a random division. But then we have to find unifying things. There's been commonality, also some kind of mutual validation. So saying that, yes, it's okay to feel very proud about America, for instance, but it's also all right to recognize that America has sometimes not lived up to its ideals, or that country music is very American, but so is hip hop. So some sound very red, some sound somewhat blue, but Reds and Blues can validate each other, and those are potentially ways to unify rather than just hope to not have a further deterioration, which is usually what fight right is. It's putting people a little bit more in a box.
So let me get to one thing you said, because you said you don't quite like the messaging of, I forget the example you used, they come together or all together in unity or something.
Frontal lobe.
What's that?
The frontal lobe. He says.
Civility or civil discourse.
Civil discourse, civility. But I think there are two different ways to think about that. One is that that's not good messaging, but that there is a better way to get to that behavior, or that behavior is not realistic, full stop. So it doesn't matter the messaging you use, you're not going to get to a level of civility that you want to see. And I think there are people, and I depending on the day, I can think this too, which is, throughout our history as a country, we've never really had this unified, gracious politics. That the idea that we do is more of a sepia-toned, idealistic version of the past than it is realistic. But I wonder, do you think that it's the messaging that's ineffective, or do you think it's the goal that's unrealistic?
That's a very good question. I come at this from the standpoint of Jonathan Haidt, that we're led by our elephants, so emotions and intuitions, and that a lot of the kind of frontal lobe, very reasonable aspects that people might argue are often just articulating these underlying emotions. But that doesn't make civil discourse bad. That can be a good ideal, but I think often the pathway to get there is that it's sort of an emergent property. That if we feel that people who have different views are good people who have the best interests of the country at heart, normally we'll talk in fairly reasonable ways with them. Like, okay, right, they have a different starting point, but they seem to have a different conclusion. Okay, let's try to work together and figure something out. So it's not that necessarily it's like, I am going to be a good person because I am following the civil discourse thing and this is morally right to do. It's sort of like, well, yeah, they're fine. So like, why would I yell at them? And then, so from the outside, it looks really nice, even though the pathway to get there is somewhat different.
Ruth, you are a heterodox in your community. You might have some interesting perspectives about fight right and what that means. What do you make of all this?
Well, I don't mind fight right. I actually think the word fight seizes on a sensitivity that is very, very palpable nationwide. All of us are kind of on the verge of feeling as though we're fighting the pandemic, we're fighting economic decline, we're fighting politically. We might be fighting our neighbor. So to use the word right after fight diffuses some of the aggressions and fear, I think, that we feel. So put together, fight right, I feel, is almost a paradox, right? Like, fighting isn't usually right, but if we fight right, that means we are transcending that animalistic impulse to, like, win at all costs, even, when one of those costs is our neighbor's well-being, and we might actually like our neighbor, though we disagree with our neighbor. So I think that the fight right is actually a pretty realistic and effective way of thinking about moving forward within Braver Angels and within the country as well. In terms of how it guides us and how it leads our discussions, I mean, I really think we have to be honest, we have to be candid, and say, yeah, there are things that are really concerning us and really ticking us off about the other side. It's okay to say that. I mean, we don't need to say, oh, well, the other side is like half right, if we really don't think the other side is half right. And we have to stand up for what we believe in, but we also have to listen, because we need to understand that other people have the right to believe something else, and you know what, we might learn from them. So I feel there's a clarity and an honesty in the fight right mantra.
What do you think? Because maybe this is too strong of an analogy, but if you think of two boxers, neither of them are holding anything back when they're in the ring. They're not thinking, I'm going to fight right, so I'm going to take a little something off this punch so that I don't hurt him too badly. But afterwards, fighting right in that context then might mean, but I respect him as a human being and I don't want to end his life, and after the match I'm going to shake his hand and send a bottle of wine to his family, whatever that is. So do you think fight right governs more the field of play, the contest itself, or how we how we treat each other afterwards. What does the fight right apply immediately, or is fighting right more of a sportsmanship thing?
That's an interesting analogy. It's an interesting analogy, and I think you're right to bring it up. And I want to say it's the wrong analogy to use, but unfortunately has been used in the political arena, right? That is one of the saddest things about politics is we treat it like a sports endeavor. It's not. We're not playing games. These are people's lives. And given that they're people's lives, we don't fight to win. We fight to make sure everyone's okay, right? We want to make sure that as a country, it's not a win-lose. We want a win-win. That should be the game of politics, is win-win. But we're not treating it that way. We're fighting wrong. So it's not a boxing match, but I really appreciate you raising that analogy. I want to change the paradigm. I think Braver Angels is about changing the paradigm. We're not boxing. We're fighting for a win-win.
Yeah, I think that's mostly right. I think the one thing that I would have to think more about is that sometimes I wonder, like you said, we're dealing with people's lives. And I think that sometimes that raises the stakes of engagement so much that people take the result too personally. So they go, this is too important. We're dealing with people's lives here. And so then if they lose, they also lose their minds because they feel like, oh no, now life is worse for me or my neighbors or the people of this country. And so I wonder sometimes if we could use a little bit more abstraction in that sense in our politics. But then again, abstraction can also lead to dehumanizing someone. So maybe I'm completely wrong. But Erica, you joined us late, but you know the tenor of this discussion because you were there when our first discussion got lost to the ether. So what do you think of all this? Feel free to jump off at any point you wish, and then Michael, I'll get to you for a follow-up.
Yes, apologies for jumping on late. It was interesting, Greg, that you raised the boxing analogy, because when I first saw Braver Angels come out with the Fight Right slogan, I did kind of blanch, and my immediate reaction was like, oh my gosh, fight. Okay, so I'm conjuring up the gladiator ring, and it's bringing up for me this, politics as blood sport, which is really what we're trying to move away from in Braver Angels. So of course the fight is qualified by the word right. And so it's like, that's really where it's at, is what does Braver Angels mean by right? That's like the crucial part of the slogan. And I think in that respect, when people, read about it and learn more about Braver Angels' mission, it's very right on. And it's what you all have been talking about. Like the core of it, I believe, is simply not dehumanizing it. Not dehumanizing each other, no matter how strongly we feel in our position. So I think that's, that's the main thing. But the fight, it does kind of trigger that sort of more aggressive part of ourselves. I believe we all have inside of ourselves like the seeds for being peaceful and cooperative, and the seeds for, being violent and terrible. And so what gets nurtured and what the kind of language we use can kind of draw out our better or worse qualities. So I think, God, what we're seeing so much now, so horrifically even in the past few days, is how verbal warfare, fighting verbally, escalates into actual physical violence. I think so many of us have been motivated to be involved in Braver Angels out of precisely the fear of what we're seeing now. It's like, I know it's like been my worst fear for years, and we've seen glimmers of it, and now it's really escalating. But I have always felt like dehumanizing people and verbal warfare, like the end game, if that doesn't reverse itself, the end game is very likely violence and civil war. So I don't have a better idea. I'd be out there with a better idea if I had one as an alternative to fight right. But I would certainly rather not use the word.
This is just sheer curiosity, because you talked about being born with the capacity to do both good and evil. I wonder, I don't think this is an original thought, but sometimes I'll think about conservatives seem to be more of the mind that people are born flawed. I don't know if I would go so far to say evil, but that one needs, the shaping mechanisms of the family and other civil institutions to bring about the best of humanity, while I think liberals tend to believe that people are born good. And I haven't thought this all through, so I don't know, how that would affect any sort of policy agenda or broader outlook. But I just am curious, because I think you've looked at this a little bit and studied a little bit. So what you think?
I haven't, and I don't know.
Okay. I thought you mentioned it in an article about how people are born, but maybe I'm misremembering or misreading.
I think it's largely just, there might be some research on it. I think it'd be a very hard thing to study because we can't really communicate with newborns too well. So I think it's largely impressionistic. I think it's really largely people's intuition about human nature, and that can really vary.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Michael, I know you had some follow-ups.
Yeah, I can agree with some of the feelings here expressed that we can fight right, and that if you take it in the wrong context, that's what you get. You get a boxing ring, and I think that's true. But that's a very frontal lobely articulated idea. And the problem is we're not dealing with the rational. We're dealing with the pure emotional. And I would probably dive a little deeper into this and into that the idea that this kind of postmodern critical theory has seeped out of the university, and now it's out there on the street, and it's really kind of bizarre. Okay, but I was in the academy for a long time, and postmodern critical theory was usually somewhere in the humanities, where people in the social studies, social sciences, especially in economics, kind of ignored it. But now it's become almost like, wow, we can't even decide, on gender pronouns and stuff like that. I mean, this is something like someone with an economist goes, where did we lose? Where did we lose ourselves into this irrational kind of world? And and I'm in political science and economics, but in political science, it's like, it's almost kind of the division point where people in political science go, yeah, we have to study a lot of economics, and so we deal with certain assumptions about human behavior, but we also have a whole bunch of Marxist strains and stuff like that, and neo-Marxist strains in political science. But that was pretty much based on class issues, and now this is all based, postmodern critical theory is all based on identity. It's all based on your identity, and what gender you are, what your ethnicity is, what your race is, what your skin color is, and all this. And to me, it's like, well, this is the context where you're fighting in, and there is no. It reduces down to whoever has more power. Okay, we're not talking about win-win. We're talking about win-lose, and it's based on who gets power. And if you see this stuff that's going on in Portland, this is a power play. It is. I mean, whether you think it's right or wrong, it's like, how can we take a power away from where it is now and change the constellation so that we get more power? And you can make lots of arguments why that should be so. I mean, inclusion and stuff like that, and participation in democracy. But there's also a lot of ways where that just does not get you there. It gets you into like, okay, now we're in power, so you're canceled, okay? And that's what I fear is the context where we're trying to fight right, but there is no win-win being laid out here. It's only win-lose. And I think that's the real danger. And I think that when I listen to how Braver Angels sees fight right, I could say, oh yeah, okay, that's cool. But I don't think people trigger that way. They trigger immediately going, fight. What is right? Right is whatever I say it is, you know? So that's the problem, I think. And I fear like, well, I don't think, you know, our discussion is going to change anything, but we're going to be observing all this. And we're going to be observing this all the next 3 months. And, you know, it's kind of scary, you know?
Yeah, what interests me about this moment too is how both sides seem to feel out of power, or like their power is slipping away. Like even during the Obama administration, Republicans swept into power in Congress and I think gained control of most state houses. But there was this sense of, oh, but we need the presidency back because that's where the power is. And I mean, liberals and even more progressives have a lot of influence in some of the biggest cultural institutions, the Hollywood, journalism, the academy, to have a platform to really put ideas out into the world. But there's this thing of, oh, but we don't have the presidency. You know, how do we even have power? And there's this weird thing where power is supposed to be diffused in this country, but everyone sort of sees the presidency as the only means of expressing power, or the only means of power that they feel good about. And I don't quite understand why. That can be more of an open-ended question, because I know we're trying to wrap up, but if anybody has any responses to that, let me know and I'll call on you. But James, what do you make of all this?
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of things we could talk about. I guess it's a little different than Michael. I am here to try to figure out what to do about this. I'm a consultant professionally. I call myself a depolarization strategist. So I am only here to write, to say what is possible to do. I mean, we have to understand issues in order to have reasonable solutions. So before I brought up something about ways to bring groups together, it's fairly classic in-group, out-group type dynamics, how to make people feel less threatened, commonality, validating some aspects of the other side. But I think something that Braver Angels doesn't do all that much of is focusing on structural factors. So Michael brought up one, which is kind of the academy. That's a little hard maybe to deal with directly, but a lot of those ideas get promoted through kind of left-wing media. And so there's a large kind of partisan media network, both on the left and on the right. Then there's social media, and there's the parties have kind of split ideologically. So before, right, there were conservative Democrats, there were liberal Republicans. That's not nearly as much the case today. And then it's a question of what can Braver Angels or any kind of depolarization group actually deal with. I think that dealing with partisan media is very hard because it makes financial sense to be very polarizing. And as Michael was saying, right and left talk past each other, because that's their job. Their job is or why they make money is because, right, they give out red meat or blue meat to their audience, and they're not going to change really, although I think there is the potential for unifying media, which is why I'm starting United News Roundup on September 14th. Check it out. And then, you know, for social media, I think there potentially are some algorithm changes. There are some other like structural things, and figure out what can be done, some of which could involve a lot of government intervention for good or bad. But I do think it should be on the agenda of depolarization to think about what could be done with these institutions that are, I think, at least exacerbating a lot of divisive content.
Yeah, that's a whole field to mind. Michael, I think I cut you off. You wanted to say something about what I commented on about the presidency.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I mean, our system of government was really set up to be decentralized. It's supposed to be decentralized. It's supposed to have checks and balances. It's supposed to be balanced between three branches of government. And the thing is that probably in the last 50 years, maybe even starting with FDR, it started more and more of the decision-making power has been transferred to the executive branch. And Congress was supposed to check that. And Congress has become more of a freelance arena where, so it doesn't come together as a way to act as a governing body to check the presidency. It becomes, you know, okay, we're dividing which side we're going to play. So because it's so polarized, we see this measurements of polarization in the Senate and the Congress, that it basically becomes either you fight the presidency or you rubber stamp him. So that just gives the presidency more power. So, I mean, this has been evident from Trump, but through Obama, Clinton, Bush, and all of these presidencies, because we've let too much power, you know, rise up to the national level in the federal government. And it's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be 50 states. And it's supposed to be 50 states that are all equally weighted in some sense in the federal government. And I think that's a mistake. That's a mistake that we have made the presidency so strong, because eventually you're going to get a president you don't like, and he's going to be strong. And that's what happened to a lot of people. They said, oh, it's great when my guy's in there, but oh man, it's terrible when the other guy's in there. And it's just like, it's not supposed to be that way. You're supposed to take the power away from that. But,
yeah, it is. I'm almost done reading the Federalist pages, and it's so interesting to read them worried more about the legislature trampling all over the executive branch.
Yeah.
Because they think that's what happens. It's the British Commons is overruling the king. We really need to make sure the president doesn't become weak and emaciated.
Right.
And if only they knew about the administrative state. But Ruth, any final thoughts from you?
Well, I love the idea of United News Network. James,
Yeah.
can you just repeat the name of that and tell us?
Oh yeah, well, so for now, United News Roundup. I mean, it's possible in the future it could be United News Network. So we'll see, right? Size and investment, yeah, 24-hour unifying news.
Looking forward to seeing it. So getting back to fight right, I mean, we all have to ask ourselves, what is it we're fighting for? I mean, we're fighting for our country, and we're fighting for peace, and we're fighting for our lives. We're fighting for our businesses in the face of groups, people who are burning them down, tearing them down. And I hate to say it, but in uttering those words, I know I sound partisan. It shouldn't be that way. And I don't think it is. I think the media, once again, is making us think that burning buildings down is a partisan issue. You know, the left saying, oh, well, it's kind of okay, and the right saying, no, it's terrible. No, I think the majority actually thinks it's bad. And this crosses, you know, racial lines, it crosses socioeconomic lines. It's wrong. And when we can't say, hey, stop burning that nail salon down. Hey, you know, that restaurant deserves to stay standing, deserves a chance. We are also saying our nation deserves a chance. So if we could shut out the noises of the media that want us to think that we're in opposition to that that restaurateur who wants to stay open and wants to stay alive and wants his business to thrive for himself and his neighborhood, then we can ourselves keep going. But we have to be brave enough to say it. We have to be brave enough to say, hey, it's not partisan and divisive to say don't burn things down, right? And that doesn't mean you're voting for Trump or Biden. It's just you've got the balls to say it's wrong to burn things down. So fight right, fight for one another. I mean, there's actually nothing more inclusive. We're all on this ship together.
Yeah, and if Brave Rangers needs an alternative slogan, you can just say "Have some balls."
There we go. I thought that would be appropriate. It just slid off my tongue. Brilliant.
Thank you, Erica. Final thoughts, last words. I think you're going to close this thing out.
Oh, the power. I'm going to exercise it as a zero-sum game. That is, though, what I wanted to pick up on, though, when Michael talked about how we view power and operate on a zero-sum basis in this country. I think that is huge. And I think that something that plays into that in a really exacerbating way in our political discourse is, I think a lot of people in this country, and modeled by the media and social media in terrible ways, have gotten in the habit of talking about each other as if I don't just disagree with you, but there is no place for you in the world that I'm fighting for. You're not part of my beloved community. I'm trying to build something beautiful here with all the people I love, and you're not one of them. It's zero sum. It's my team or yours. And I see that so much. I see it as like endemic to our political discourse. And if I could, I just did a couple of
Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful discussion today. It's been so interesting. Talked about Fight Right and went down all kinds of avenues, which I love. So thank you to James Coan, Ruth Ashkenazi, Michael Harrington, and Erica Etelson. This has been another Writers Roundtable, and I've been Greg Steinbrecher, and we'll see everyone next month. Sorry, it told me I got signed out for a second because somebody else wants to use this from another device. But
no, I don't know.
Okay. I think it's okay, but if somebody hops in here in a second, I am going to scream. I'll put it on mute first, and then I'm going to edit all this out, by the way. Don't worry. This will be just a bonus track. But yeah, so just be prepared. Somebody might come in here in a second because I just got logged out according to my Zoom. All right. But anywho, pressing along here, what was I saying before?
Hashtag not my president.
Yeah.
Hashtag not my president became a movement. All right. For people where this is